Rafi, when I mean helping other people become Rafi, like it's, you think of all the people in your PhD class at Cornell who became academics or whatever they did, all the people from Monitor who either stayed on into consulting forever or did various things. I don't know if you would agree, but my gut is that the vast majority would trade their careers for yours, just given the freedom. They're going to be people who maybe make more money, maybe are more famous or whatever else it is. But just from my experience, and I've benefited from kind of you helping me along the way as Christopher has and the like, is there's nothing quite like being on your own. And it's a trade-off that I would make 10 out of 10 times. And when we're talking about the humor thing beforehand, like when you present, I would pay money to have a front row seat in that, because it's an amazing combination of entertainment and education at the same time, right? Which you're the master of. You're just the rare person who can swim with the academic nerds, can be an advisor, but also have been in the arena for a long time. And so I just think that you have a lot to offer around that. So I know your story at a high level. Like Culture Profit, you went out on your own when, roughly?
2005, 2006. So the story is that I was working at Monitor in their sort of internet division, and I'd done a good job. I'd worked very hard there, and then it was like going south.
Rafi, can you explain, because Monitor is an amazing brand that has been subsumed under the acquisitions of the world and stuff. Can you give a little bit of context for the folks who may not be familiar with Monitor?
So I think Monitor really started out of Michael Porter's work. Michael Porter had came out with this 5 forces framework. How I had heard is that he had started off, doing some consulting work for AT&T on an antitrust trial, and that led to AT&T being $100 million a year client in the 80s. And this sort of caused Monitor to sort of explode. They had 20 plus offices around the world. And they really started off as sort of,
I would say back in the day, the joke was if you were anywhere near AT&T, you'd walk around and they were just handing out 7-figure projects to lots of people. So it's an amazing client, but obviously Michael Porter, the king of strategy, and his book, Competitive Strategy, I don't know how many copies people have bought.
40 plus million the last I looked.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So keep going. Yeah.
So they had, I had joined on as sort of in the standard consulting role, and they had started an internet division, and they were writing some books. And so they asked me to join. And yeah, at that time it was very hot. So I'd work hard. And then all of a sudden things weren't going very well with the division. So they're going to do a lot of layoffs. And my boss came to me. He's like, look, you've done a good job. He goes, we're going to give you a year's severance. I was like, okay. And we had been dealing with an agent, and I had always been interested in pricing. And that was my hobby. And I was just so into it. And I never thought ever that I would ever make a dime off of it. But one day at Monitor, one of the heads of the division said, we think there's something with pricing and maybe we should do it. So that really got me thinking that, oh, well, maybe there's something there. So the story is that I ended up working with a literary agent that was associated with Monitor, sort of famous agent. And it was stressful working with him. I wasn't sort of jiving, I wasn't hitting the mark. And one day he calls me, he's like, look, I'm not going to make a dime off of you. I'm cutting you as a client. I was like, great. But, I was thinking about this. I just hustled and hustled and hustled. I was so passionate about this. There was something on the internet where it listed all of these publishers and, editors there. I was just sending out letter after letter after letter. And at Monitor, I had written a book from McGraw-Hill, a textbook. I was one of the 4 authors. And McGraw-Hill was like, oh, great. Yeah, we're going to publish your pricing book. And I'll never forget one day coming home, and this is days of the answering machine, and there's a message on my answering machine saying, hello, this is McGraw-Hill. We're not going to publish your book. I was like, oh. So I remember I was like, I just need to find a new career. I'd sort of hit a low. And when I decided the next day I was going to call every single editor, I was scared to do it, but I called every single editor and said, hey, what's going on with this proposal? And the second or third call, I ended up talking to an editor who was very famous at Crown Business. He's like, yeah, I actually read your proposal. He goes, I like it, but you've structured it entirely wrong. And he goes, so I'm going to send you some proofs of a new book that's coming out. And he goes, just follow the structure. And Christopher, for one of the first times in my life, I actually listened to someone else who I believed was smarter than me. And I just copied it. I copied the structure. And lo and behold, a couple weeks later, there was a small bidding war between Crown Business, Harvard Business Publishing, and Wiley for the book. And that's how it all kicked off.
That I was curious. I was talking with Kat and Christopher beforehand of, surely Rafi did pricing at Monitor and the like. So this idea of that this was a hobby is kind of fascinating to me.
I think it's really important because a friend of mine always says, find out what you're really passionate about or really like and find someone to pay you for it. And I was just interested intellectually in it. We see it all the time. It's such an important part of business, but it's this passion which drives you to really want to do more. And like I've come up with this thing in the last couple of years where every client I work with, I want to learn something out of the gig because I'm interested in it. And I think you have to have that extra interest and that passion to make yourself great as opposed to good.
Well, it's striking. You made the leap because you were pushed to make the leap, and it looked like you were jumping towards. Am I describing this correctly? As an author writer, but were you also planning to use that to launch a solo consulting career? Or
Absolutely. Absolutely. Michael Porter was my hero. He wrote the book and he sort of started everything off of that book. So it's not an unworn path. It's a well-worn path to do it, to start your own consulting company. I think at the end, the books have been great. I think the ongoing articles for the Harvard Business Review is really sort of what the
yeah.
continuity that sort of made it.
What, but you know what's interesting, Rafi, is that you're exactly right that there's the Michael Porters of the world who have kind of shown the path, right? You know, whether it book to consulting or consulting book and then consulting as a solo person. What's striking to me is how many people who enter consulting who don't realize they still have to create their own intellectual capital, and they can't just rely on, well, I'm a Monitor person or I'm a this and that.
Absolutely.
It's kind of, so you had written a textbook. So the beginnings of intellectual capital, you're building it out at Monitor around pricing. You said it was
Well,
started
the
there.
textbook was actually on internet marketing.
Internet marketing. Okay,
And
great.
so, because that was the division that, there were some professors there who were just writing. They're like, oh, you have a PhD, come work with us. And, it was good. It was a great relationship. But that really led to the meeting of the agent and me thinking to myself, wow, I could actually do this.
So you have this, and then small bidding war. This is great. And then is this still in the time frame of you have a year of severance? So you have a safety net that way. And
So the funny story is, yeah, I had a year's severance and this happened like 3 months into it. And then I called the head of Monitor. I'm like, by the way, I just got a book deal. He's like, okay, well, why don't you come back? So they paid out the severance for the year and then they paid me to write the book. And so, yeah, that was sort of an interesting twist on how things happened there.
okay, well, I wasn't expecting. Okay, so you leave. They give you severance for a year. 3 months in bidding war, they bring you back as an expert or as a specialist, or what was
You
it?
know what they said? They're like, we'll pay you for a year just to write your book.
So that they can claim it's under the Monitor banner.
So, yeah, they viewed it as a start. And then as it turned out, at the end of the year, all of a sudden, all these other people wanted to sort of get in the game and it just didn't work out. So I've had I've had sort of two instances where you talk about, I think, reputational capital, where I just decided that while it would have been easy to do this, it just wasn't fitting in with what I want to do and where I saw the future. And so there have been two instances where I just walked away. And I felt it was going to be one of those things that,
To co-write it with you, you mean?
no. It was just sort of like who was going to lead the practice at the.
I see.
And so at the end of the day, I thought to myself, in a year, one of us are going to be standing, and I'm not so sure which one was going to be. And so that was sort of my cue to sort of move on.
I'll say I've experienced this, and I think it happens way more than people may think. And you don't have to name names or whatever, but the stolen valor part of intellectual capital happens a lot in the
Absolutely.
name of practices at consulting firms. And it kind of makes you question, like, it kind of makes sense from a strategy perspective of put the biggest name person on the content so it'll go farther and faster, regardless if they had anything to do with it or not. But and certainly you were correctly surmising the odds of you being the last man standing at the top. But like there are benefits to still being under the umbrella of Monitor. But at some point you made a decision like, I'm going to be my own reputation. Like, was it thought out, or were you just sick of it?
No. Because, as you said, you have to, especially when you're a consulting firm, you have to keep building up your brand because the odds of you sort of lasting for your whole career at one consulting firm are very low. I've known lots of people who are big brand name consulting firms. And it's like, great. And then when they leave, all of a sudden, nothing. They're not known for much. And so it was very important for me at that time. And I remember sort of seeing how business development was at sort of, in my 50s, I don't necessarily want to be writing cold call letters.
Yeah.
And
You
and
know,
this
it's fascinating how they fall into the resume trap, and it's a lot of type A people with great pedigrees. And you're exactly right. They assume that because they're an alumnus of BCG or McKinsey or whatever, the world is set for them. And it's like,
Yeah,
no, no, no. At
right.
some point, you have to stand on your own intellectual capital. You have to stand on your own reputation. That's not your resume. And if you haven't done that, then where are you going to be? And so what's kind of fascinating is, so you're writing textbooks, internet marketing, which told you that you could write, and then also the first book on pricing, which is at the Art of
Art of
Pricing,
pricing. Yeah.
which is an amazing book. So go get
Still
it and
selling
read it.
well.
Still selling well, absolutely. And then can you walk through, you talked about reputation capital, and obviously Michael Porter ends up with $100 million of fees from AT&T because he did something amazing for them. What was your first big kind of like pricing outcome that you were like, wow, this thing really works?
I think early on, and what's continued is really showing up at companies and really first question I always ask at a company when I go to is, how confident are you pricing? Highly confident, somewhat confident, not confident. And I'd have to say 90% of the time, most people are like not confident. So that it immediately shows you the opportunity. There were multiple times where just some of the basics of pricing really, really helped companies. And, sort of walking out of a company, I mean, I'll give you an example. We're going to start doing some work with a company that I worked with many years ago. And they said our profits went up by 50% the first year. And then after that, we can attribute another 50%. It is just an area that most companies haven't focused on. And let me tell you one other story about the opportunity. I once gave a talk for a Fortune 100 company, sort of the same talk you've heard, a little bit funnier, Eddie, over the years. And at the end of the talk, the CEO stood up. He goes, Rafi, great talk. We have 40,000 people here. We can tell you cost of the penny. We don't have one person who's focused on pricing. This is what you see time and time again. And pricing is such an important part. You work so hard to bring your product to market, and then you just drop the ball on on being compensated for it. It's hard to understand.
Can I just share? And I'm sorry, everybody else jump in because I don't want to hog all of Rafi's great stuff. But like in the intellectual capital mini book, we talk about 5 ways to build intellectual capital: a test, a lens, tools, wisdom, and outcomes. And I just wanted to highlight, you've checked all 5 in like 3 minutes, right? The test is, how confident are you in your pricing? Such a simple question. And it's not an intellectual one, it's an emotional one, which I've always learning from you that so much of pricing is about understanding the emotions that are going into the place of the decision here. The second one is your point of view, your lens, right? Which is, I always love a 1% change in your price can lead to an 11 or 15% change in operating profits, if not more. Thirdly, your most famous article, or the biggest hit, Good, Better, Best. Such an amazing tool. We talk about that. We were just talking about that earlier today. And then, wisdom that you have. I always think about your point about focus on best, that the lion's share of your revenues can come from best, which is so counterintuitive. And then the fifth one on outcomes, like you have so many outcomes to share of, as you said, when you focus on the one thing that matters that nobody else is focused on, you can generate double digit, if not triple digit in changes in your profits. And it strikes me that there are few things that are as impactful and as quick to implement as pricing.
Absolutely, because since most people haven't done it, so oftentimes I feel like I'm the candy man. And oftentimes after a workshop or even a talk, I'll see people come up with me. They're like, here's a list of things I'm going to do. And I remember I did a talk recently, and like they called shortly after. They're like, we're already starting to make money off of this. But I did want to get to something you mentioned about sort of, you were talking about resumes and people having a big brand resume. And Christopher, I thought about you because I was talking to a friend of mine in the music business, and we were talking about the singer, and she has everything. She's very talented, and she has the skills to be a great musician, and she comes from a lot of money, and she has a lot of connections, but she is having a lot of problems going out and developing her brand and what differentiates her. So she can replicate everything very well, and that, doesn't have the stress of money, But I really think that you do need some of these knocks in life to sort of make you better so you can understand what's going to hit. Like I now know when I go into a talk or whatever, I know exactly what's going to hit. And I think that's so important. So, I often say that if you get there quickly, that's great, but I would be nervous because you haven't gone through the part of,
Yes.
getting kicked around and learning from them.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. So one thing we're starting to tease out is new languaging, a new word, a portmanteau we're inventing called earnership. So we've all heard pride of authorship or the word authorship, and we all know what ownership is. There's an interesting thing that we've noticed, Rafi, which is people who don't earn it or don't feel like they earn it / deserve it, they're not right in the head.
Yeah.
And one of the
100%.
things that we're focused on with Creator Capitalist, we sort of got here in an interesting way, and sort of the light bulb has been turning on brighter and brighter. If I think about it personally, one of the things I love about where I am in my life, nobody can take that shit away from me.
Hmm.
Point A. Point B, when somebody who's earned a reputation for legendary results through the four capitals walks in the room, you don't have to know who that person is. I don't have to know you're a man of circumstance to know you're a man of circumstance. I'll give you a simple example. My wife's family runs the last working orchard in Silicon Valley in San Jose. Her father is 94 years old. He is the last fruit produce OG in San Jose, period. And when you come to the family farm to buy fruit on the fruit stand on the side of the house at the front of the orchard, you don't have to know who Papa is to know that's exactly who he is. And that's earnership. I have earned my place. I earned my Yoda. And there are people who are given some of these things, and because they didn't struggle and they didn't stand alone in a foxhole for a week and fight off the bad guys, get out of the foxhole, and then build a legendary life multiple times, because they've never truly walked through fire, they feel like frauds. And I think that's a big part of where this imposter syndrome bullshit comes from, because when I try something new, I don't feel like an imposter at that thing. When I started writing and podcasting and when we first started Category Pirates, we weren't creators. We didn't feel like imposters. We felt like beginners. And the reason is the earnership. We fucking are who we are, and there's no doubt about it, and there's no doubt we earned it, and there's no doubt how we earned it. And there's a special joy in life that comes from being able to stand on that. And people who shortcut it, people who get given too much, they rip themselves off from the fucking foundational joy of being able to stand on their own earnership. And you have it in spades. And I think that's a big part of what people really want.
The earnership part, what's so fascinating is it requires this weird paradox, right? That Rafi, I think you embody really nicely. Is it's easy for someone with a PhD from Cornell to say publishers should line up to publish my book. And it's another thing for someone with your credentials to be like, no, I'm going to hustle and call every editor out there. And it's like, did you actually read my proposal, this and that? And there's smart people who oftentimes do not speak simply and clearly. And you're kind of unusual that way, of somebody so intelligent who can speak so plain spokenly to the average bear out there. And so like this earnership part, that it's so fascinating. It's tempting to look at your, so clearly your reputation pricing is a great way to build it out. And it's kind of striking that there aren't more Rafis out there. And I just think they don't have your courage, to be honest, right? Because there's a different level of fear that I have found when you make a recommendation to a client to take your pricing up, because the feedback is immediate if it works or doesn't work, right? And it's a little scary. But so your reputation, I'm not surprised that it's just out there in spades. It's the intellectual capital part I keep coming back to, and we'll touch on relationship, but like the earnership part of like, can you demystify what it's like? So writing a textbook with a couple of other people makes sense. Writing your first book is a scary thing. How do you go from starting out to writing over 100 articles on HBR? because I bet you've gotten this, like, hey, can you get me into HBR, as if it was just a simple email or phone call that you can make, right? Can you walk us through your writing journey and building your own IC out?
Well, so I did want to get into to start working with HBR. And what happened is, I had a pretty famous agent and he called over and they're like, yeah, we're not interested. I was like, okay. And so later on, Eddie, I think the PR firm that I was working with. Suddenly like, hey, we got you a meeting with the editorial director of the Harvard Business Review. I was like, really? So I went and he was just like, yeah. He goes, my editor at HarperCollins is the same as yours. She says great things about you. So why don't you write an article for us? And by the way, if you want to do some of this internet stuff, we can do it because it had just been started. It's like no one was writing for them. I mean, there was a year I did 18 articles for them and I was just really into it. And so it was a lot of
All right,
fun.
I'm gonna slow you down just like Christopher does so great. 18 articles is a massive amount of productivity in a year, period, regardless of the publication. Do you have a guess as to the odds of getting an article in the HBO? No one's ever told me what how many are submitted versus how many get through. I just wanted people to feel the math here.
Well, just for clarity, so the majority of that 18 were for the digital side.
Yep.
For the digital side. So
yeah,
I don't have
there's different math for the digital and the magazine.
Right.
We get that, right? But can you
Right.
just, what would be your guess?
No, I really don't know. Certainly on the print side, it's
I'm looking it up.
So, talking about relationship capital, there have been two people who've been very formidable in my life, and one was the editor Dan McGinn, and Dan has really helped me. I mean, but he was a real believer in what he's doing, and I'm super grateful to him. And I think there have been other print magazine articles, but I would say from what has happened since, the Good, Better, Best article has got to be one of the better articles that come up that they published. And I'm telling you that it was 7 years ago today, and I probably still get 2 inquiries a month from people who've read that article and want to talk. And these are inquiries from Fortune 500 companies. So he was
I just looked it up on Supergrok. HBR rejection rate is over 99%.
So take 99 and then to the 18th power, right? Or whatever it is to get 18 in 1 year. Now, because like in Rafi, you're totally right. Like whatever, it's 99% in general. It's probably 99.9% for the magazine, or if not higher than that. And so I think it's helpful. I mean, Dan is our editor as well. And, he goes, and I remember, to your point about relationship capital, my experience, this is circa 2007 or 8. I found a ghostwriter who had a connection with an editor at HBR, not Dan, someone else, right? And then we had to pay the ghostwriter to get to the connection, which was all fine and good and whatever, right? And it was just rejection after rejection after rejection. And the feedback was, yeah, we wrote about that 37 years ago. Thank you very much, right? And it was just this old, I won't say the name, this old dude who had been there forever and was just like, whatever, man.
I think it was probably the same guy.
Same guy, right. So there's an element of persistence that's required when it comes to creating intellectual capital. Your hustle to reach out to the editors and this kind of the willingness to tolerate rejection. And then
this goes back to I hate to interrupt you, Eddie, but this goes back to the earnership thing. One of my favorite TV shows is Shark Tank. And I didn't watch it for years because I thought, why the hell would I want to watch that? This is sort of my business. This is my world. Why would I want to watch it? Well, it's turned into one of my favorite shows because for the same reason I love doing this work. I love being around and supporting people who want to do the exponential legendary, right? The exponential different. And so Shark Tank makes me happy. Anyway, long story longer, I was watching a rerun of Shark Tank yesterday, and it was this gal who had a very successful college basketball career. And she invented a device that you put, I think it's on their top 2 fingers, to help get the arc of your fingers exactly perfect to throw the ball and score the hoop. Anyway, she applied for Shark Tank 15 times. They said no 15 times. And they were all still about to say no because it was still too nichey. And in the end, she got 2 sharks after 15 times. right? And so there's a expression that sort of came out a while ago that you don't hear very much anymore called stick-to-itiveness, which I think is a fun word, right? And it sits with earnership to me and tenacity. And when you apply 15 fucking times and they say no to you and you get on and you're on the verge of not making it, and then you take down 2 sharks, that's what we're talking about. And the pride and the joy and the achievement of that is not like I just happened to buy a lotto ticket and wow, isn't it awesome? It's not the same. It is not the same.
Which is probably, I'm guessing you get this, Rafi, is like, I don't know, but fairly regularly, someone that I don't know, a lot of people that I do know will reach out and say, can you get me on? Right. And I'm like, I don't think you understand how much rejection you have to, yeah. And actually, that's my response is like, are you committed to the craft of writing or not? Because that you have an article, which is largely a commercial for whatever you're trying to promote most of the time. It's just unlikely to get through unless you're committed to failing and, getting the feedback and optimizing that and stuff. And it's just kind of interesting to think about your writing career, Rafi, just because writing a textbook and then versus writing a business book versus writing an HBR, very different.
Absolutely. You're absolutely. So 2 stories on relationship capital. So let me address what you just said. So after I got the big book deal, Crown Business, I wrote it, I sent it to them. I remember this distinctly, getting a FedEx. Look, so, I started looking through pencil edits. Then there was a 7-page letter that ripped me to shreds. And I remember calling my agent. I'm like, are they going to publish this book? And he goes, you're lucky to have an editor like that who actually took the time. So that's when I realized, and this goes to something that I used to think I could do everything, but I now realizing, finally made the realization there are people smarter than me in other areas. And I actually brought on an outside editor who, in fact, I'm having dinner with tonight. And he was just so good. And he really helped me. So that's the one thing is about relationship capital. And then
we call that one loved ones who won't lie to you, which is a 7-page ripping you to shreds. So important.
You're right. It was very important. But the other story I did want to tell you was you talked about sort of the storytelling and everything, and it brought me back to my PhD days. And so when you go in the job market, you go to a hotel, you interview with all these people, and you have to give the pitch on your thesis. So I remember sitting in one of my professor's office, and the most famous professor in the room he's like, "This is terrible, absolutely terrible." And I was like, "Oh man!" But then this guy, a friend of mine, he really helped me. And then this is unheard of. So I actually had a job interview with Wharton. And so we're in this big suite. There are 10 people. And my friend had helped me craft the story behind my dissertation. At the end, everyone stood up and clapped. And that was unreal. And so it does go about the people who believe in you and who help you.
How do you know it's going well? When you present the dissertation and everybody stands up and claps, that's how you know it's going well.
Then I got the call out to Wharton. It didn't go that well, so I didn't end up there. But it's a good story.
Can I give people an example? Because I've heard you tell this, because it's so important, the ability to do, because we've talked about it, to be able to think and create new intellectual capital, to be able to write it totally different, to be able to speak it and communicate it. Do you mind telling your Tom Brady umbrella story? The way that you pitch that?
Well, so which version?
Pricing inelasticity about umbrellas and Tom. I forget. You did something that just made everyone laugh when you presented at Cambridge.
I mean, the story was many years ago, I had a backstage pass to see the Eagles. And so afterwards, I went backstage. I got to meet Don Henley. And Don Henley, there were a lot of people waiting in line to speak with him and everything. And I certainly wanted to talk to him because when I grew up in Cincinnati, I think I heard Hotel California every 15 minutes of my life. But when I got to the front, I knew that Don...
On a dark desert highway.
Christopher, did you go to the Sphere to see them?
I did not. And I don't know why. I must have been not paying close enough attention. I didn't even realize they were there. I saw
they added
U2
new
there.
shows in September, so I think we need to have...
They're coming back in September?
They are, yeah.
All right.
So,
are the tickets on sale yet, do you know?
They are, yeah. They just added 4 shows. I'm sure they'll add more. But the notion is that when I got to the front line, I said to Don Henley, I'm like, you and I have something in common. He's like, well, what's that? I'm like, we're both interested in pricing. Because the Eagles, as you'll remember, when they reunited in 1994, they set very high ticket prices. And so he's like, oh, yeah, I'm really interested in pricing. He goes, I always tell people our prices are going up because our costs are going up. I was like, well, we were sort of friendly and more on my terms. I was like, well, actually, Don, that's the wrong way to think about pricing. And I told him the simple umbrella story. The umbrella story is that street vendors in the middle of Central Park, the minute that it looks like it's going to rain, they double the price of their umbrellas. And this very simple story illustrates.
And they show up as if by magic. People who haven't been in Manhattan when it starts raining can't appreciate sort of the real-time entrepreneurship that this is. There's nobody selling umbrellas. And then it starts raining, and within 15 to 30 seconds, and they have they have these large baskets of them they're pulling around, and here's their sales pitch. You ready? Brella, 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 and they're sitting there. It is one of the most incredible capitalism in history.
So that simple story illustrates one of the most important concepts in pricing, which is called value-based pricing. So these street vendors, they didn't double their prices due to cost. Cost had nothing to do. Price is all about the customer's next best alternative. So I'm in the middle of Central Park, and if it looks like it's going to rain, I have to run 4 or 5 blocks to go to CVS. So they're really charging for the convenience of this. And, it's that simple story, from 2005 still follows me to this day. And, oftentimes I'll give a talk and it's being translated in 3 or 4 languages. And the translators are like, oh, no one's going to ever say anything. But then when it gets to the umbrella story, all of a sudden you hear a lot of chatter. It's something that resonates. It's a very simple concept, but I'm telling you, Eddie, most companies don't think that.
Well, most people don't get to give Don Henley advice and reprimand him about his own pricing and like either too.
So along that thread, Rafi, one thing that we've obviously people are very interested in pricing, and you have a lot of experience with companies, and we're speaking a lot to people who are either kind of going out on their own or they have like a small company that they're running, call it a 2 to 10 person-ish team. And I'm kind of curious, when you started doing your own thing, did you use your consulting pricing model and apply that to your own pricing? Like, how do you think about this as an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, as a small business, especially this value-based piece? We talk about it a lot in terms of outcomes. What outcomes can you produce for people? And we actually teach people good, better, best and how to create that based on their outcomes. But I would love to hear it from the pricing master himself.
I think it's really about being realistic of where you are in your career. And if you're starting off, you're not charging McKinsey prices. You're charging, you're not as good. And here's the beauty of pricing. The beauty of pricing is you don't have to be the theoretically best to survive. You can simply say, look, I get that you have a lot of alternatives to think about, but is it really worth the 40 to 50% premium that you're paying? But the question you asked is very good because I think about it to this day. So now at this point, I'm dealing with a lot of companies and their next best alternative is really sort of big, large brand name consulting firms. And my prices are nowhere close to that. And if I think about the next best alternative, I've been thinking that, well, should I raise my prices? And then it really came to the point where I thought about it. I've come to a piece of it that, I feel like I'm charging something that's fair. And at this point in my career, I'm okay with that. I know that I'm probably leaving some money on the table, but that's what I'm comfortable with. And I don't know, maybe I need to rethink that, but it's all about what your comfort level is too.
It's interesting that you say that because everybody talks about the value of raising their price, which is intuitively obvious. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone, maybe you've written about it and I missed it, Rafi, the value of lowering your price. And in my case, I got to a place of such pricing power that the amount of pricing for me normally means equity in a startup that I'm advising and serving, where I could go much further beyond the percent equity that would be even considered normal, like more than double what normal. And what I realized was there's a price point, at least in the high-end advisory world, that if you go beyond, it sort of breaks the laws of physics and pisses people off. If your equity position is larger than that of the CMO or the CFO, and like it's like we granted this guy more than some of our most senior executives to do what now? Right? There's just a certain law of physics that if you break, it causes animosity, and it sort of
Absolutely.
lingers like a fart in the elevator, even though you can get it. And so I realized over time where that price point is for me, equity and cash, where it's a massive premium compared to a typical advisor who they call once a quarter, because I'm not a once a quarter kind of guy. But at the same time, it doesn't go over some number where you got to get the board involved, and the board is pissed, and the executives are pissed, and the CFO is pissed, and like, who's this asshole, right? I'm curious as to your reaction to that too.
No, I mean, I'd 100% agree. There's certainly many times when we have the opportunity to charge a higher price. I just think about at the end of the day, like I give CEOs a lot of recommendations, and maybe they take 50% of them. Okay. And I've sort of come to at peace with that. It's like I've given the best recommendations, but they have to do what's best for them. And oftentimes that will be sort of scaling down a price increase or rethinking a good, better, best or this, that. And so they do, at the end of the day, all the principles come into play, but you have to make an executive decision about whether this is something you want to do. Let me give you an example. There's a very famous American Economic Review article that found that at car dealerships, there was systematic price discrimination. Women were getting higher prices. Non-white people were getting a higher price. And, one could argue, well, that's capitalism. Okay. But if I were the CEO of that company and I saw this result, it would bother me. Might not bother other people. It would bother me. And I would probably take some steps to mitigate that. I'm curious what you think.
I think this comes down to something we've written a lot about and believe deeply in, which is the distinction between missionary and mercenary.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
For example, my wife Carrie and I just got back from just this resort that we fall in love with. And one of the reasons that we fall in love with it is the guy who's the head chef, the senior guy, ahead of all food and beverage, kind of the number 2 executive of the whole place. He's in his early 60s. And he is absolutely positively in the top 1% of chefs on planet Earth. He was mentored for 10 years by Thomas Keller. He has been the coach of there's several international cooking contests that are like the Nobel Prize of cooking. He's been the coach of the American team multiple times. He's won Michelin stars. He's, you name it. Like if you want your restaurant, now he mostly focuses on hotels, which is where we met him. If you want your hotel to get a Michelin star, you hire Chef Robert. And so this guy will go above and beyond for people. And it's a heart-based thing.
Yeah.
And do they charge a lot? Yes. But at the same time, they throw in lots of Scooby snacks and they treat people incredibly fairly. So this guy spends a tremendous amount of time with us and like they make their own fucking croutons out of their own brioche, which they make. Okay. And so I think of that as give a fuck. And when you are somebody who's focused on that, there is a fairness that comes with it. Just because it's like, just because you could charge a rich person 25% more, should you? Right? Or you think you could rip off a certain ethnic group or women versus men or all that. If you're a missionary who loves what you do and goes above and beyond, like a lot of small businesses have a high level of give a fuck. They make decisions through more than just a financial lens, as opposed to, say, United Airlines, who makes all decisions through a spreadsheet lens. There's also a fairness
You know what's
lens.
interesting and the fairness lens, Christopher and Rafi, is that there's a set of trade-offs, a wisdom about trade-offs of the 4 capitals that you both are talking to, right? You could maximize your financial capital by charging more, price discriminating in all the ways, and getting every last penny at the cost of your relationship capital and your reputation capital, right? Because that's what partly, Christopher, you were saying is like, I don't want to be known as the guy that squeezed every last penny and caused animosity.
It's not worth it. It's not fun for you. And you don't want to do that to other people. And from a reputation capital, they're like, oh yeah, that guy's awesome, but man, he's a pain in the ass and he's going to fucking smash you on price.
Well, and that leads to the relationship part, because I think at some level, Rafi, like one of the interesting things that I think it applies to all creators, but there's especially for consultants in the machine, as it were, right? There's this trade-off of how much money you can make financial capital, your reputation, relationship capital, time for intellectual capital, but also the amount of agency and time you have. Obviously, you like music, you like other things, and there's different things. And, my experience has been being a solo consultant, and Christopher was instrumental in helping me see this, was like better financially for me than I was at my old firm. But I have so much more agency in my life. And that comes from not squeezing every last penny out of the last project that I did. It comes the agency and the freedom to say, I don't want to work this much and I'm going to choose to do recreation and leisure, comes from the fact that I have built separately financial capital, invested wisely, but also I know that anything that I do, any interaction that I have is towards the mission of building positively my reputation and my relationships. And when I have that in abundance, I don't worry about the financial part nearly as much. So I don't know if you can talk to that a little bit of like what, in hindsight, what does current Rafi say to younger Rafi about the journey that you've been on?
Well, in my case, I would say it will take longer than you thought, and it's something a lot of people say is to sort of enjoy the ride.
A lot longer.
But there are going to be side trips, sideways, some down times and great times, and just sort of realize that that's going to come. I used to tell a friend of mine that I had problems sleeping because I was depressed. I was really worried about getting things going, and then after things were going, I told my friend, I'm like, yeah, I can't sleep now because I'm so excited about things. But getting back to agency is so important because it gives you just the freedom. It gives you the freedom. Look, in my business, you are going to have an off year. You're going to have fantastic years, but you're going to have off years. And you want to have the agency to be able to grit it out. There's also the value of controlling your time. I mean, I remember many years ago, I met my old boss from Monitor, and we went to Koreatown in LA. It was a Tuesday, and we were having a great barbecue lunch. We were drinking Corona beers, and we were in shorts. And I looked at him, I said, what's the value of this? It's just priceless.
Which also reminds me of one of my favorite of your HBR articles of when you talked about the butcher and slicing the bulgogi meat and stuff, which can you tell that story real quick? It just makes me laugh.
Well, I think I forgot what was the story. I remember.
I think it was you went to the butcher and
at Whole Foods.
And so it's ribeye. You have to slice it thinly. It takes more work from the butcher to do, and the butcher did it for you at your request. And then you said to him, you could have charged me a lot more for this or something like that, which was.
Yeah, no, I remember that story exactly. So at the end, and this is where people drop the ball on price all the time. So at the end, I was like, hey, I just bought a lot of meat from you, like 50 pounds. I'm like, can you give me a discount? And the guy, not only had he spent all his time cutting it, he's like, okay, yeah, I'll give you a 25% discount. And this is what I see time and time again. People are so lackadaisical about giving discounts when they don't understand what they're giving away is really the top of their revenue, which is their profit. And I see this time and time again of people just giving it away. And, I always
depending on the type of super, like we have a local butcher, an independent guy who was the head butcher at Whole Foods. He got downsized out during COVID. He always wanted to go solo, and he did. And he didn't start a business. He's transformed the way a community eats. We're in there 2-3 times a week. My wife will call me and say, hey, I'm going to go to Tim the Butcher. What are you feeling like? And I'll say, well, go see what he's got going on. Right. And as big repeat customers who are in all the time, he wants to give us discounts. I said, Tim, I don't want a discount. You know what I want? You to be here in business forever. That's what I want. I don't care. And he's premium priced. I don't care about the discount. I care about you being in business.
That's exactly my feeling.
If you want to throw in a Scooby snack every once in a while, that's always really nice. And they do, they say, oh, we just got these in, and they'll give you a little bit to try. The other day, scallops by way of example, and my wife hadn't really made many scallops in her life, and one of his butchers is explaining the scallops and how you cook them, and you do this, and they're real easy, and they cook fast, and they taste great. And so he says, let me give you, I don't know what it was, maybe half a dozen scallops to go with whatever it was we were buying, and go give it a try. Well, they do that shit all the time. Well, now, of course, we're buying scallops all the time, right? So A, is it radically generous, of course, and B, now we love the scallops. But the point being, rather do a little bit of that to deepen the super consumer relationship with a super who doesn't, in this case, and I know it's maybe not usual, doesn't want the discount, wants to make sure you're highly profitable and successful and don't fucking go anywhere and don't shut down.
You know, it's interesting. So I have a barbecue guy who's just like this. I love this guy. He's a great barbecue guy. And he always has like a Yelp discount or this type of discount. And one time I told him, like, yeah, I just want to be clear. I never use those discounts for you. I'm like, I want you to succeed. And the funny story, Eddie, is he called me right around Christmas. And he goes, Rafi, I've got to raise my prices. He goes, brisket and everything. And, you know, it was going up. And so it was interesting. The first thing I did was I talked about the umbrella story. And I was like, look, your prices are even lower than McDonald's. Why would you be worried about that? That's the customer's next best alternative. It's interesting. Then he wrote this folksy letter on Facebook, and people are like, you're cheaper than McDonald's. But what was interesting about it is that we created value bundles. And he later said to me, he goes, it's been a huge success, but he goes, you know something, that just energized us. And so it's interesting how the bundling had really energized him. And then it's interesting, there's a barbecue place close by to where I live. He's about an hour away. And I noticed that they immediately started offering bundles too. I wondered if they were correlated. But
And the interesting thing about this, I think it's very true for small business, solopreneurs, independent creator capitalists. And it's also true for tech startups. When you're an early stage company, yes, do buyers want value? But if they buy into your point of view, your vision for the category, your vision for solving the problem, and they see what you're doing, they go, oh my God. There's an interesting thing that is under discussed, which is people who, it's like bands, people who are early adopters of stuff want the stuff they early adopted to succeed, right? It's like, oh yeah, well, you know, that musician's really popular now, but you know, I heard the first demo tapes that were out on the internet that nobody heard, and I loved her from the first time. You know, I'm one of the OG fans of this music, right? And it's the same thing with businesses and people. It's almost a way for people to scratch their own entrepreneurial itch, right? I feel like I'm part of my butcher's business. This resort I was telling you about, I'm an advocate for the resort and for Chef Robert and for what they're trying to do there, as though I had ownership in it, right? And so that connection is a very real thing that particularly supers feel. And if you think about a Rafi or a Category Pirates with sort of solopreneurs, creator capitalists who are smaller businesses and even startups, customers feel like buying in you is an investment in you.
That's the part that I think is so important for every creator capitalist out there who wants to be a Rafi or their version of Rafi. Like, this podcast is so incredibly important. And you just Google HBR Rafi Mohammed, you'll just find the litany of things to read. But the part that's so powerful, and why I'm just so delighted to talk to you again. We don't talk enough. We should just talk more often. But I reference you so often that I think for creator capitalists to understand, even if you're not going to be a pricing consultant, you have to read and consume Rafi stuff in books, because you will getting your pricing right could make or break your business, number one.
But let me get to Katrina's point about good, better, best. And it tags on Christopher's. Best goes back to the super consumer. There are a lot of Christophers out there who are just like, yeah, I love the butcher, I love the chef. And you'd be surprised, I think, a best, which is priced 35 to 70% higher than your regular product, I think you should be targeting 30 to 40% of your customers in that bucket. And these are people who are just diehards who love you, who want to support you, but also they see incredible amount of value. I mean, Eddie, you hit it right on the nose with the super consumer book. And there are a lot more people out there. I mean, this has been the biggest shock of my life, is how many super consumers there are out there and how they're willing to pay. And by giving them this option, they'll be like, great. And when someone buys from you, they're in essence saying to you, look, I looked at your better and you're good, but I think that best gives us the best value. And I'll give you one last example. I know I might be going over, but I'm passionate about this. It was interesting. Allstate offers good, better, best for their insurance. That has several types of accident forgiveness. And I thought it was really interesting when they came out. It's been a huge success for them. But the state of California initially banned best. And the reason they banned best is because it was too profitable for Allstate. I said to the guy, I'm like, no, wait a second. I said, you're giving customers the option of best. They can take better or good, and they've decided that best offers them the best value, no matter what your profit margin is. And the guy just sort of, he shrugged his shoulders. He's like, it was very frustrating.
It's funny because I think I mentioned to you, my old firm, the Cambridge Group, worked on the strategy for Allstate's Your Choice Auto, and it's based on the super consumer, which was so fascinating. Is there are I'll let Christopher self-select where he falls into this bucket, but there are great drivers and there are poor drivers, right? And Christopher, I'm convinced is a great driver, right? There are two types of great drivers. There are some great drivers who are just skilled at driving, and there are some great drivers who are just extremely disciplined and safe and cautious. People can figure out which of the two great drivers Christopher falls into. But the irony of the great driver who is safe, disciplined, does not speed, does not take risks, is that the entire strategy of Your Choice Auto, if you've seen Dennis Haysbert talk about it in commercials, like they've marketed it up the wazoo, and it's been incredibly successful for them, was there are great safe drivers who want to be recognized for their great safe driving and will pay Allstate a premium to be recognized. They will pay a super premium price point for auto insurance, which by definition, they are not going to incur much of as a claim because they are good, safe drivers. But they would like to pay a premium for A, being recognized, I'm a good, safe driver, B, that you're going to give me features that I only can get, features including accident forgiveness, which is when we had done the work for Tom Wilson at the time, it was like the actuaries had a revolt. They're like, you want to forgive accidents? What, are you crazy? That doesn't make any sense. But like, no, you have to understand this is targeting a super consumer who is far less likely to get into an accident, who is going to pay you a premium for the privilege to have this feature that they will never use. Right. If that's not a super consumer story, I don't know what is, but I think that the story that you just laid out illustrates to me the intersection of supers and good, better, best and category design is that the easiest way to design a new offer or a new price point or a career as a creator capitalist is to start at the best price point with your supers because they are so forgiving, so invested in your success. Then if you get it wrong, they will tell you and you can fix it and they won't care because they are happy that you got it right. And that this whole notion of, as a creator capitalist, you got to read good, better, best. You got to think about niching down your category design into the best price point and design the optimal super ding dong offer for whoever that is. And don't be surprised when half your revenue comes from that bucket.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you have that, then you can be strategically generous at the good level. And then when you figure out those two, you can figure out like, okay, if I've optimized for the best and I've been smart. And I love your stuff about like, don't make it easy for people to buy the good price, which I love. That's such a wise thing to say. The hard part is figuring out the better one, but that'll be easier if it's bookended by, well, I've got the right best price and I got the right good price. Better, which a lot of people will buy, will be far infinitely easier than starting with better without having solved for the other two in the first place. Like I can't express enough like how important it is for every creator capitalist. Like this is the one thing, pricing is far more about emotion than it is about economics. And every part of your business strategy and your planning comes to a head through pricing. You got to get your best pricing right for your supers and design it for the total experience for them. And if you do that, the odds of you succeeding as a creator capitalist go up exponentially.
I agree.
Well, and this is too maybe topical, but I'd love to know what you think happens in a world where iPhones are $3,500 and all cars are 25% more and all imported alcohol is 25% more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is being called the largest tax increase in the history of America. And of course, it's going to go immediately to the consumer because there's nothing else you can do. And so when iPhones are $3,500 and Nikes are $300 or $400 where they used to be $150, what happens in the world?
By the way, to your point, Mark Cuban just tweeted, better buy all your household items now in bulk before they all go up in price.
I'm telling you, I'm going to the wine store today. There's 3 places I buy wine here in town. I'm going to all of them today, and I'm buying all the Northern Italian reds I can get my hands on, all of them. I shit you not. And if you're in the import business, and it turns out everybody's in the import business. So I'm just curious, Rafi, how does the largest tariff, AKA tax increase in the history of America look through your eyes?
I think it's going to be very bad for the economy. And so the question is, which way are we going on this? Is it a negotiation? So I did see that Trump tweeted that Vietnam immediately has called him and said, "Hey, we'll take off all of our tariffs." And so if it goes that way and we get into a tariff-free world, I mean, that's great for the U.S. because that's just going to make our products more attractive abroad. It's going to stimulate demand. Okay, but if this is a fundamental shift where we have voted for someone who thinks that that the United States, it should be protectionist and everything should be built here, then I think that's problematic. And so the question is, which way is it going to go? I think it's a negotiating
I think that's what he
stance.
wants. I think when you really unpack what's going on, and it's just my assessment, but having done a lot of reading, that there is a tariff component of this, and you may say there's some validity to some of the playing hardball. Maybe there is. However, two things are also true. Trade imbalances are not necessarily wrong. My favorite Italian restaurant, 4 blocks from here, I have an extraordinary trade imbalance with them. It's many thousands to zero. Right? And the reason I have such a trade imbalance with them is because they provide a tremendous amount of value to me. And it turns out that I've fallen in love with them. And when they reach out to me for business advice, as they have in multiple situations, including a sticky legal situation they were in about a year ago, I didn't charge them because I want to help them. So even in this situation where I could have applied surge pricing to my massive business acumen to help my favorite local Italian restaurant, I didn't do that. So radical trade imbalance, not a problem necessarily. And the other thing is, we don't want to make everything in America, because if we do, we're going to have $3,500 iPhones.
But I think the question is, and it's a fair question for us to be asking ourselves, is that should we tolerate, our trading partners having tariffs against our goods? Like, why?
I think in general we want fair trade, right, versus free, and fair is a subjective thing. And I think where Trump is right is he says, well, there's a lot of European cars and Japanese cars in the United States, and there's not very many American cars in either one of those regions. And so there's some validity to some pushback on that. The question is, are you willing to increase the price of everything in America by 25%? Because you think so. I think he's actually partially trying to negotiate trade deals, but I think he actually wants to. I think he wants to remake the U.S. economy. If he thinks that we should be making iPhones, which is what I fear he thinks, we might be in for a very long, rough ride here.
I would agree. But I mean, but let me ask you something. I mean, why should we tolerate? It's a question. It's not my position. But this question is like, why should we tolerate, for instance, a tariff against U.S. cars in Europe? If we're not tariffing them, why would we ever agree to that?
1,000%. But what's happening here is way worse than reciprocal tariffs. It's not even close, because he's factoring in the trade deficits with the tariffs as though they were one thing, and as though trade deficits are always bad.
I go back to Rafi, your thing about a 1% change in increase in price can lead to 11% more of operating profits. Like the one theory that I've heard that makes the most sense, but it probably means a lot of uncertainty for the next 6 to 9 months, is that there's, call it $6 trillion of debt that needs to be refinanced short term out of 36 trillion. And that if by, again, how intentional or not, by leveling tariffs and therefore slowing consumption and therefore pushing the economy closer to recession, and that will have a deflationary impact. Inflation will come down, and it should take the 10-year treasury bonds lower, below 4, which it's cracked 4%. And so, I haven't done the math on it, but people are saying, like, if you can refinance, $6 trillion of short-term debt at a lower rate, that could be tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of interest payments. Now, once that is taken care of, like, I don't know how far, I don't know if there's another tranche of $6 trillion that's coming and whatever else it is, but it's, I would say all the classes I took in college, like, are now like, oh, this is like real stuff. And we're going to see who's actually right about all this, because there's a lot of theory, but I don't think we've ever had kind of real world data for 100
Well,
years as to what will
but
happen. So
the two things I would say is that now President Trump is jawboning Powell to lower rates. Okay, that's the first thing. So that would sort of add into what you said. And the second thing is, how long are Americans and the Republican Party willing to deal with the economy sort of faltering? And you have to think about that too.
right. Well, because that's the calculus of, if I had to guess, it's whatever the Venn diagram is of the enough time to lower and refinance the debt to at what point do you have a political deficit where you're going to lose the midterms. Like there's some calculus around that. That's probably like, unless he's totally,
I mean, if the midterms were today, it would be the largest bloodbath in history.
Yeah. So we'll see kind of what nets out with that. But it goes to the point of there's never been anything more important than pricing. Like I just have to say, like it's the litmus test I use. Just like you talk about how confident are you on your pricing. Whenever I have a question around someone executive is like, oh, my business is great, or your brand is strong, I'm like, okay, if you raise prices by 10% tomorrow, what would happen? And then you see the blood drain from their face and you're like, okay, now I know how much courage of your convictions you actually have about your business or your strategy or whatever else it is. And it's the same thing for a Fortune 500 company as it is for a new creator coming out there.
Absolutely.
So it's so I think we're all grateful that you are in the world doing the thing. So keep doing, keep writing, keep espousing your point of view, because we need to follow your leadership with it. And the largest companies to the smallest entrepreneur will all benefit from learning from your intellectual capital, Rafi. So.
Well, and I guess maybe the last big thing I'd like to ask you, Rafi, is to go back to earnership. So you went solo in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, right?
Early, yeah.
Yeah. You are the category king of pricing. I mean, it's undeniable. And so as you stand on that foundation that you've built and the difference that you've made for so many, because your work immediately impacts growth and profitability, like within days, weeks, or certainly a quarter at a major enterprise. So just tell me what it feels like to stand on that decades after making that decision that you are the category king of pricing.
Oh, it's the greatest feeling, but it goes back to the mission. And when I hear statements of, we boosted profits by 30 to 50%, it just makes me happy, because I mean, I've helped the company survive. I've helped them, continue on their mission. They can invest more in creativity. I don't know. It's the happiest part of my job to hear those types of results.
And hopefully
That's
this will
why we all
help a
wanna be
bunch of
Rafi.
people get their own results
Yes,
and
exactly.
apply a little bit of that wisdom to their own business and their own careers.